When we stop and consider microcultures, this comes down to a more individualized level. And these are kind of the way we can build more rapport and also think about our own behaviors related to microcultures. And I think some people are putting in here, my chat's being very weird and it's not loading very quick, so I'm a little bit behind, but I do see some people talking about, right, like culture is more fluid. It's not just like what your background or race is. It can be learned, right? It's shaped by all your multiple cultures and experiences. And, I think that these are all really great examples and experiences that you guys are sharing. And it comes down to one person doesn't have one culture, right? We're experiencing microcultures around us all of the time. Some of them, like I shared, are chosen. Some are shaped by just our life experiences of how we were born, who we're born, what we look like, or what our brains work like, right? And so when you think about the culture within the culture, if you will, right, the microculture. So not only does someone practice a certain religion, but they probably belong to a certain church or temple or whatever, wherever they go to practice or expand or be part of a group that shares their culture and their value and their religion. That church or temple or synagogue, right? These places look different. The culture within the culture is different no matter where you go, right? Some churches, are very musical and, people flow in and flow out, and some are dressed really specifically, or some, synagogues on certain days you dress a certain way or you speak a different way, or some are quiet, some are loud. And, even just within that experience, there's microcultures. So I'm sure if anyone lives in, suburb or cityscape kind of environments, you probably have multiple religious environments that you can choose to belong to. And you probably choose based on, where does your friend go? Where does your neighbor go? Or I tried that one. I didn't like that microculture. I didn't like that experience, right? I'm going to try a different one. Think about even just your neighborhood, where people are living. Who are your neighbors? What are their cultures? What are their behaviors? I know some people, especially as a parent, you seek out certain types of neighborhoods, right? So, when I was a kid growing up in the 80s and 90s, everyone was outside. All the kids were on bikes, and my neighborhood was very kid-centric, right? We're outside doing certain, riding, like I said, riding bikes, playing different games, etc. And, so for my children, I wanted to find a neighborhood that had a bunch of kids in the same age so they could go have that same experience. Some families choose to live on more like a farm or rural area where there's more nature and more impact there versus less people. And some people don't choose their neighborhoods. So again, it widely varies based on your culture within your neighborhood. Education. So this one always makes me laugh. I'm sure there's a lot of you that attended certain colleges or certain high schools or certain master's programs or whatever it is, and you had like a mascot, or I know like there's like hook'em horns and all different things that are related to that specific school. And again, it's that microculture. It's the experience that you have or the behaviors that you have that are all shared amongst that specific group of people. So if you run into someone and you went to the same college, you're probably like, oh, did you go to that one event on that last Saturday of the April every year? Or did you go to all the football games and experience that, whatever that culture and that behavior was. It's a shared experience. It's something that you grow upon, and it's kind of becomes your collective identity, right? Like, oh yeah, I was a panther, or yes, I was a bulldog. Even if you didn't play a sport, you identify as part of that culture, that identity. And it's something that lives on with you regardless if it fades. But I'm sure if you run into someone and that's a positive experience you had, it's something that you smile and share about, of that value or that practice or that group that you belong to. Neurodiversity, again, like kind of how does your brain work, and running into people that have a similar diagnosis or behavior related to how your brain works or how you learn. Again, it's that shared value. It's that way that you reflect on your collective identity. How many people now are talking about, yes, I'm an ADHD or yep, I'm part of the, the OCD group or whatever that looks like. You kind of form a group around that belief and that collective identity of how your way of life is. Your work behavior. So microcultures within the workplace. This is, I think this is a well-known identity, a well-known microculture, right? I'm sure you've worked at places that have kind of like small cliques of, this group of people does this, and I want to either perform like them or not perform like them. Or if there's like a high turnover, right? Everyone follows suit. That whole kind of that group, if you will, that had that microculture within that work setting all kind of goes to the same that same behavior, right? They all leave or they all get promoted or everyone around them flees or whatever that looks like. And also thinking about your own behavior and what your work behavior looks like versus the next pictures of like a family, right? What does your family do? How do you behave with your family? What is your family culture versus your work behavior, your work culture, or maybe your friend group or friend culture? Right? If you think about like, let's say it's a maladaptive behavior, if you will, let's say cursing, right? Or swearing, saying bad words, you're less likely to engage in that behavior at work or maybe with your family, and probably more likely with friends, right? Because that's kind of your shared practice, the behavior of the group and that microculture. So you change your behavior related to where you are. Obviously, we know this as behavior analysts, right? But it's all kind of shaped around that microculture. What's being reinforced based on your values and beliefs, and what's the overall practice of the group? What is that collective identity? Like we're all behavior analysts, right? It's that collective identity of being BCBAs. And what does that mean for your beliefs and your values related to people's behavior, or how you're walking into a new workplace, or how you're walking into a new hobby. You probably take on hobbies very differently than others if you're a behavior analyst, right? So identifying kind of those microcultures and how behavior changes. So like I said, work, family, friends. The middle one on the bottom is kind of hobbies, activities, groups that you might choose to belong to. And then, of course, your geography. Where do you live? Where do you practice? That will definitely shape your behavior related to what microculture you kind of belong into. I know if someone says like, oh, you're from New York, where? If you know anything about New York, Long Island's very different than New York City. New York City is very different than like Hudson Valley. Hudson Valley is very different than upstate, kind of in that Buffalo and up there area. So there's things that even within a microculture, there's smaller microcultures and smaller groups that you become even more drilled down, if you will, right? Bigger shared values, bigger beliefs, bigger practices, because it becomes a smaller, more concentrated group. So if you're walking in as a behavior analyst to a very concentrated group, and they have very specific behaviors within their microcultures, yeah, exactly, right? Brooklyn is different than Queens, is different from Bronx and Staten Island, absolutely. So you have kind of that collective identity and way of life that you need to stop and observe before you come in and engage in kind of ABA, right? Before we say something should change, you want to see what is the collective values, beliefs, and practices of the group that you're walking into, that you are serving. And if you work in the world of OBM, I'll be presenting that in a couple months, thinking about how to, full change, right? Full organizational change. You're walking into a whole microculture that exists and you're the outsider. So thinking about, what behaviors and observations you need to make before making any suggestions or changes. Oh, and it didn't switch for me. Here we go.